Hi, gay. Maxie here, once again wishing you a safe and queer Pride Month. In this week's episode, Carolyn and I discuss Harvey Milk, a fixture in both the San Francisco gay political scene and queer U.S. history as a whole. Keeping with the San Francisco theme, this week we'd like to highlight the Transgender District. The Transgender District is the first legally recognized of its kind in the world, located in San Francisco's Tenderloin District, which, in addition to being the location of the first documented queer uprising in the U.S., which was the Compton Cafeteria Riots of 1966, this district has been home to trans people since the 1920s, and is also home to San Francisco's first openly gay bar, Twin Peaks. If you'd like to donate or learn more, you can visit transgenderdistrictsf.com, or you can click the link in the episode description. Additionally, if you're a fan of Heartstopper like me, you should consider buying Sebastian Croft's t-shirt. Unlike his character Ben Hope, Sebastian is more than happy to support queer causes and celebrate Pride, and he's helped design a cute t-shirt with gay dinosaurs named Dylan and Derek, the proceeds of which go to both Choose Love and Rainbow Railroad, two wonderful organizations helping to ensure the safety and security of queer refugees around the world. If you'd like to buy the shirt or learn more about either of these organizations, you can visit the links in the description. Finally, we forgot to mention it in the episode, but content warning for suicide, state violence, and discrimination against queer people and murder. But, as always, I hope you're having a wonderful Pride Month, and I want you to listen to me when I say this, okay? Listen. Stay safe. There's a lot going on right now, but stay safe, stay gay, and happy Pride. Hello,
Hello.
I'm Maxie,
Hello, love. I'm Carolyn.
and this is Mutable Immutables, the show where we quibble queerly.
We exchange pleasantries when I remember to do so.
Yes, yeah, how you doing today?
Oh, I'm peachy, honey. How are you?
You know, I think I'm also peachy.
Oh my
I woke up in a
gosh.
good mood. Yeah,
I woke
that
up
never
at 1
happens.
p.m.,
I love that for you.
which never happens, but it was well needed, and so I'm in a great mood.
Hell yeah, love to see it. Pamper yourselves this Pride Month, everyone.
Yes.
Okay,
All right,
so
what's the tea?
in keeping with our Pride Month theme, today we're going to be talking about another very well-known name in the queer historical community, and that is the one and only Harvey Milk. What do you know about Harvey Milk?
I watched the movie Milk years ago. I
He
mean,
needs some milk.
oh my god. I mean, I guess in doing my San Francisco research, obviously, I came across the
Right,
basics,
yeah.
but I have never admittedly gone into his personal life or anything. So I'm interested to hear the facts that you have gathered.
Yeah, I've heard his name honestly since the movie came out in 2008, but I just never looked into him. I never saw the movie. It was always one of those things that I was like, I'll get to it one day. And now I have. However, I'm going to preface this by saying I am not the scholar that Carolyn is. My one and only source is wikipedia.com
Oh my
or
god.
.org, whatever it is.
It's .com. I would like to
Sure.
say that I am that person donating $3 to Wikipedia.
I'm also that
Put that out
person.
there. Hell yeah. Hell yeah. We all should, because you know what? We all fucking use it.
Oh my god, yeah, especially Wikipedia is, for those of you who are our age, honestly, anyone who's been in school or who was in school, I would say around the Y2K time and following, I'm sure that you've heard teachers say Wikipedia is not a reliable source. That's not true. People put a lot of time and effort. I mean, obviously, sometimes people can go in there and just change some shit up, but that doesn't last for very long. It's a fine source. Plus, they have all of their references annotated at the bottom. It is a public good that everyone just uses for free, and it's almost always on its last leg. It's like libraries. Like, y'all really hate free education.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Anyway.
Support your local public library too. Get a library card.
Mm-hmm. I didn't realize this was such a hot button issue for me.
I know,
Okay.
right?
All right.
Off the soapbox we go.
Yes. Small anecdote. I had a professor in college who was a very cute man who I loved, but also he he literally had like a little milk crate onto which he had taped the word soap. And some days when we would have more philosophical discussions or whatever, he would bring the box in, and if he had something to say, he would physically step onto the soapbox and he would say his thing, and then he would physically get off of the soapbox. It
The
was cute.
drama.
Anyway, I know. So, who was Harvey Milk? For those of you that don't know, or you may recognize the name but don't know who he is, Harvey Milk was the first openly gay man to be elected to a public office in California, and he was also the first gay man to be elected to a governmental position in the United States, and that position was a seat on the board of supervisors in the city of San Francisco, and that was in 1978. However, he held this position for less than a year because he was assassinated. And we'll get to that later. But first, we're going to start with his early life. This is very much structured just like the Wikipedia article that I got it from because, again, I got it from Wikipedia.
Oh
so I'm sorry.
But you know what? Not everybody likes to read, and some people are oral learners. So, cheers.
Yep. All right. So, he was born on May 22nd in 1930. Children of the class, do you know what sign that makes him?
Wait, what day?
May 22nd.
Jan 8th. Wait. Oh, May 22, Gemini, right?
Yep.
Or is it? Okay.
This boy is a Gemini. Yeah. And surprisingly good at politics. I wonder if that's connected.
Oh my God.
We'll get into that later. So he was born May 22nd, 1930 in New York. And he knew he was gay from a young age, but he kept his relationship secret into his adult years because for the first half of his life, he was actually more of a conservative Republican. And that identity wouldn't really change until the 60s with the free love and the flower children and the sexual revolution movements that kind of happened across the nation. But up until that point, he was very much more of a white collar kind of conservative pencil pusher. He went to the New York State College for Teachers in Albany from 1947 to 1951, where he majored in mathematics and wrote for the college newspaper. After college, he joined the Navy during the Korean War and served as a diving officer and then later as a diving instructor. However, he resigned from the military in 1955 and was forced to accept an other than honorable discharge rather than face being court-martialed for his homosexuality, which you, Carolyn, I think actually brought up last week. And we'll get to that when we talk about San Francisco too, but it was one of those gay discharges. The blue discharge, yep. So following his military service, he started teaching at George W. Hewlett High School on Long Island. And then in 1956, he met a man named Joe Campbell at the Jacob Riis Park Beach, which at the time, I don't know if it still is, but at the time it was a popular gay beach on Long Island. So the two began a relationship and then eventually moved to Dallas, but surprise, surprise, they didn't like Dallas as queer men in the 50s, 60s? Yeah, 50s. So they moved back to New York, and then Milk got a job as a statistician at an insurance firm. But then shortly after this, due to some personal differences, Milk and Campbell separated. After their separation, this is just a side note, after their separation, Milk got bored of being single in New York and debated on moving to Miami to marry a lesbian friend of his because it would work out better for both of them. However, he decided against it and continued to secretly date men in New York.
Fun fact, those are called lavender relationships when it's like a lesbian and gay man marrying.
I thought it was called dual bearding.
That too.
Or double bearding. Listen, we do what we got to do to survive, okay? It's honestly, it's your fault, not ours, because y'all created the society.
Oh my god. Okay. Let's.
Um, has that ever passed through your mind? It's passed through my mind. Although I'm not bisexual, so I I don't know. But I've thought about it. I've had lesbian friends.
What? Okay. I'm sorry.
When I was younger.
I'm just not following your train of thought here.
Neither am I. It's okay.
Okay.
In 1962, Milk started dating a man named Craig Rodwell, who was 10 years younger than him. Now, I do want to take a second and say Milk did have a thing for the younger men. I wouldn't call him a pedophile, but he did have a habit of dating men who were significantly younger than him. The context of the time was different, but overall, there were a lot of things that Milk did that would definitely get him canceled today. He was not a perfect person by any means. He was a politician, but he was a historical figure. So we're going over it. Just so y'all know. So he started dating Craig Rodwell in 1962. Craig was 10 years younger than him. And Milk really loved Rodwell, but he was uncomfortable with Rodwell's involvement with the New York Mattachine Society, which was an earlier gay rights organization.
Communist gay rights organization.
Yeah, and they frequently had a more antagonistic relationship with police because of like demonstrations and stuff like that. And actually, there was one point where Rodwell got arrested for indecent exposure, but this was like it was because his swimsuit was too short, because they had a rule where it was like men's swimsuits have to go below the thigh, and I don't know if he was wearing a Speedo or if he was just wearing like shorter trunks or whatever, but he got arrested for too skimpy of a swimsuit, and Milk ended up breaking up with him shortly after that because he just wasn't comfortable with how often his younger boyfriend was getting into fights with the police. Shortly after that, Milk quit his job and started working as a researcher at a Wall Street firm called Bosch & Co. or Bash & Co. I think it's Bosch. Where he was frequently promoted, even though he often offended the older and more established firm members by flaunting his success and ignoring their advice, which I do love to see. Then after that, he started dating a 16-year-old boy named Jack Galen McKinley. This was in 1964, and he recruited McKinley to work on Barry Goldwater's presidential campaign. I don't know a lot about Barry Goldwater, but I know that he was kind of divisive, and he was definitely more of a Republican. So I don't think he was loved by the gays, but Milk was working on his campaign and recruited his 16-year-old boyfriend to work with him. Their relationship did not go well for many reasons, but one of those reasons was because McKinley suffered from a lot of depression, but would also make a lot of suicide threats when he felt he was not getting enough attention from Milk. And in an effort to make a point to him, Milk took McKinley to this hospital where Milk's ex, Joe Campbell, was being treated after a suicide attempt of his own, which we'll actually come back to later. There's a connection there. So after World War II, as we talked about last week, we're going to move over to San Francisco now. After World War II, San Francisco became home to a large number of gay men who, quote unquote, left the military. It was a bunch of those blue discharge situations because they didn't want to be publicly outed for many reasons. A lot of them like familial relationship based, but also just because they realized that it was happening to a lot of other gay men too, and they were like, hey, there's a lot of boys in this city, I'm gonna hang around. And so by 1969, the Kinsey Institute, which I think was the same one that did the Kinsey scale that you sometimes hear referenced, the Kinsey Institute estimated San Francisco to hold more gay people per capita than any other American city. I didn't write down the numbers. I probably should have. So at this point, McKinley was enjoying a pretty successful Broadway career. He had worked on a bunch of different shows, both off and on Broadway, but he was building a pretty strong Broadway network. And he was working on a tour of the show Hair in 1969.
Of course.
And, huh?
I said, of course. Of course
Yeah,
it's
right.
hair.
Yeah. Um, so he was working on a tour of Hair that took him and Milk to San Francisco. And Milk fell in love with San Francisco, and he was like, I want to stay here. But for McKinley, he had just been offered a job on Jesus Christ Superstar back in New York. And so they ended up splitting up. Um, in San Francisco, Milk worked at an investment firm for a little bit, but he was fired in 1970 because he wouldn't cut his hair. There were a lot of like policing men's like bodily expression back then. Like we always talk about women's fashion standards and how women's bodies have always been policed, but like, and I'm not excusing that, but it did happen to men back then too. People were just so into this whole gender thing. I don't know.
And again, we say transphobia and homophobia affect everybody, not
Yep.
just trans and gay people.
Mm-hmm.
Affects
It's all
everybody.
bullshit. Gender is fake. Just accept it. Um, so he wouldn't cut his hair. And the reason his hair was long is because he was stressed out about the U.S. invasion of Cambodia.
Aren't we all? I
Yeah,
mean,
I get it, dude.
burn in hell.
So at this point, after he got fired, Milk just kind of drifted around. He floated from California to Texas to New York, and he didn't have a whole lot of direction in his life at this point. Relatable content. By the time that he got back to New York, though, he had fully transformed from a conservative pencil pusher to a long-haired hippie. And he was almost unrecognizable by a lot of his friends. Although one of his friends from his Wall Street days made the remark that that Milk seemed happier than he ever had in his time knowing him. I guess hanging around gay people will do that to you. At this point, Milk met a man named Scott Smith who was 18 years younger than him, and they started dating, and then soon after moved to San Francisco in 1972. And then in March of 1973, they opened a camera store on Castro Street called Castro Camera. So this is really when his political career kind of gets started. He didn't get involved in politics right away, but being a gay business owner in San Francisco allowed him to meet a lot of the other members of the San Francisco queer community and have more of like firsthand experience of kind of the trials that were faced by gay business owners, and that becomes a big part of his political platform because he's a very anti-establishment guy. He's very much for organized labor, especially in terms of gay business owners, and that's kind of really where he makes his impact. So in the late 60s, the government and the police of San Francisco had really started to crack down on gay people, and they were usually citing like older laws about like oral sex being illegal and sodomy laws and sex in public places. And so they used these laws to arrest gay men at parks, usually at night. But these parks were specifically targeted by the mayor, a guy named Alioto, because they were popular with the gay community. And Alioto was really trying to appeal to his like Catholic and Christian supporters. So he decided to organize on the city level to discriminate and arrest gay people. Love to see it. It was also around this time that various government officials started to realize just how wide the gay constituency and voter base was and how much political power they had, especially in San Francisco. And so a lot of people who were in the government who were not full bigots started to appeal more directly to the queer community, and they would do things like backing anti-discriminatory legislation, and they would meet with members of the community to really just kind of like build that relationship. And so, even though up to this point, aside from protests, Milk hadn't been super politically involved, he'd gotten really, really frustrated and pretty much just incensed by the governmental and the political climate of the time, especially during the Watergate hearings. For whatever reason, those just really pissed him off. And
For
so,
whatever reason, what do you mean? It's the same reason it
here's what I
pissed
mean.
everybody off.
Can I be honest and vulnerable?
What?
I have absolutely no idea what happened in Watergate. The only the
Max.
only Watergate I knew growing up was my mom would make this thing called a Watergate salad. And I don't even know what's in it except for like marshmallows.
Max. Okay. I'm gonna task you with one thing. Please just Google it.
Yeah,
Okay, moving on.
moving on. Oh fuck, I lost my place.
I'm not shaming. I'm so sorry. Let's listen. Okay, let me not shame
No.
you for not knowing something, but
No, you
it
should
is,
fully
like,
shame me. I'm
very
well into my
important.
20s and I don't know what Watergate is. Um I deserve to be shamed. Um okay, so yeah, Milk was pissed about Watergate. And so finally he decided that it was a better use of his time to get involved rather than just like sit around and be angry about things. Um so he decided to get involved in the San Francisco gay political scene. Um Unfortunately, he did not receive a warm welcome. In fact, he received a pretty cold one. Um when he decided to run for the city supervisor position for the first time, he met with a man named Jim Foster, who I don't know if I'd call him a pillar in the gay political scene at the time, but he was definitely well established. He had been there for I think like over 10 years. Um and Foster even belonged to this unofficial gay political group called the Alice Club, which seemed like an ancillary rabbit hole, so I didn't go down it, but you can do more research there if you want to learn about gay establishment politics in San Francisco. So he
we'll
went
be
to Jim
doing that
Foster
later.
of the
Thank
Alice
you.
Club. He went to Jim Foster of the Alice Club for an endorsement, and Foster did not give it to him. Instead, he said, you don't get to dance unless you put up the chairs, and I've never seen you put up the chairs. I don't know why I gave him a southern accent. It just kind of happened. So Milk was understandably unhappy about this interaction, and then proceeded to have a rather antagonistic relationship with the Alice Club. As I said, he was very anti-establishment, and the fact that he was trying to get involved in the politics and political scene of his community, and that he was facing the same establishment sort of pushback that he'd seen in other sectors of the government across the country. He was really pissed about this. He was of the mindset that where it was like, we're all part of the same community. We need to stick together. We need to uplift each other and help each other and look out for each other. And he was just, I mean, it's politics, it's who knows who, it's networking, it's that kind of thing. And he was not happy about it. So thus began the kind of constant back and forth friction between him and the Alice Club and their presence in the city. However, despite the Alice Club's well-established position in the San Francisco gay political scene, many members of the community felt that the Alice Club was too timid in their approach to like get legislation passed and to actually get shit done. And so there were some gay bar owners who had been facing a lot of harassment by police at the time. And so they decided to endorse Milk, who, by the way, was a very dramatic and loud and kind of outgoing person. And that turned a lot of people off, because at that point a lot of people were like, politics need to be respectable, you should play the game how you're supposed to play the game. And Milk was like, fuck that, I'm gonna step on dog shit in camera and make a big deal about it. Which he literally did. You can look that up. It was a whole thing. There was like that was like one of the big things that he got done was the pooper scooper law in San Francisco. And he was really great at like getting media attention. And so he had like scoped out this dog park, and he saw this like pile of dog shit there. He'd been at the park for like an hour, and then once the cameras showed up, he quote unquote accidentally stepped into the dog shit and was like, "This is insane."
Very
Love it. Gay
interesting
drama.
how we are again seeing the importance of media literacy in organizing.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, like this could be a whole episode of its own. Like for protests to gain any sort of traction, or for any sort of movement to gain traction, those involved have to be literate and fluent in how to use the media. And you see that in almost every underdog uprising type group. They find a way to
Mm-hmm.
use the media. And I think of the most recent example that I can think of off the top of my head is when all those little Gen Z kids on TikTok reserved all the tickets for the Trump rally and then didn't go. It's like like the form of media has changed and evolved, but so have the new generations, and media literacy is evolving along with that. It's very important. All right, so at this point, Milk was very politically inexperienced. He'd never run a campaign. He'd never held office. Never done anything like that. Um, and he had spent a whole lot of his life without any sort of clear direction. However, once he got into the political scene, a lot of people felt like this was his natural calling, that he was like a born politician. Um, in his first campaign, though, he did make a lot of newbie mistakes, not the least of which was trying to do the whole thing on his own without any money or staff um, and he just thought that his message would be enough. And that message was very much individuals over corporations and better money management as a whole. Um, he also advocated for the reorganization of supervisor elections from a citywide ballot to a district or neighborhood based ballot. Um, and he opposed governmental interference in private sexual matters and supported the legalization of cannabis. A lot of the same kind of platforms that we still see today. In the 1973 election, he earned 16.9 thousand votes and placed 10th out of 32 candidates, which is not bad for first campaign, especially doing it with as little resources and as much manic energy as he did it with. He actually would have won if the electoral structure that he was advocating for of district-based ballots had been in place. But it was not in place, so he did not win. Facing this loss, Milk spent a lot of time just going around the community, meeting with various community members and community leaders, where he focused more specifically on organized labor. And it was around this time that he began to rebrand himself as the mayor of Castro Street. In 1973, Milk and some other business owners founded the Castro Village Association with Milk as the president. And the purpose of this group was to support gay businesses and to encourage the gay community of San Francisco to also support gay businesses. Like, if you're gay, shop gay, basically. Still a great idea. In 1974, Milk organized the Castro Street Fair to attract more customers and attention to the area, and over 5,000 people attended. And this even shocked the Alice Club, who a lot of them either owned businesses or had vested interests in the gay businesses in the area, and they saw a huge increase in profits from that too. So they were like, well, fucking damn, like, this guy knows what he's doing. And so because of his popularity and his leadership within the community, he began to be seen as more of a serious political candidate. And he decided to run for city supervisor again in 1975. But this time he took more of a politician approach. He cut his hair, he swore off weed, and he vowed to stay away from gay bathhouses. Do you remember when Marco Rubio was spotted at a bubble party in Miami?
No.
I think about that. I think about that a lot. So, also in 1975, the political climate of San Francisco had started to change. Not only was Milk growing in popularity along with pro-gay and anti-discriminatory legislation, but the sitting mayor, Mayor A. Liotta, was facing a lot of criticism at the time for bringing larger corporations into the city, and this was called the Manhattanization of San Francisco. This alienated a lot of San Francisco natives and kind of pushed them away from A. Liotta, and it made room for a state senator named George Moscone, who had actually been instrumental in repealing the sodomy law in the California state legislature in 1975. This made room for George Moscone to be elected mayor. Unfortunately, in this year's election, Milk fell just one place short of winning a supervisory seat. And Moscone quickly faced a lot of backlash for being openly, like, pro-gay. He wasn't gay himself, but he was very, like, pro-LGBT community. and people didn't love that. And he appointed a new police chief, a guy named Charles Gain, who was also more pro LGBT. And Gain wanted to make it clear that if there were any gay men who wanted to be police officers, that they would be welcomed onto the force with open arms. He was the only one in the SFPD who felt that way, and so this began kind of a divisive relationship between Gain and the SFPD officers, especially those who had been there for longer and, were older. So on September 22nd of 1975, President Gerald Ford was visiting San Francisco and was walking from his hotel to his car when a woman named Sarah Jane Moore, who was just a person in the crowd watching the president walk from his hotel to his car, Sarah Jane Moore raised a gun to shoot Gerald Ford. A former Marine who happened to be walking by saw what she was doing and grabbed her arm, moving the gun away, forcing it to discharge into the pavement, and effectively saved the president's life. This man was named Oliver Sipple, or Bill Sipple, and Bill Sipple had broken up with Milk's ex-boyfriend Joe Campbell, who we mentioned before, years earlier, and it was actually because of this breakup that Joe Campbell had tried to commit suicide and was in the hospital when Milk took his 16-year-old boyfriend McKinley to the hospital to see it. It's all connected. One thing that has never changed is that all the gays know all the gays, and they've all dated everybody. So naturally, after this very heroic act, the national spotlight sort of fell on Sipple. There was a lot of attention there, and he was being heralded as a hero bystander. But he didn't want this attention because, he was gay. He didn't want, more people looking into him and for him to be outed. So he, kind of pushed away the idea of him being a hero, and just kind of like shied away from the attention as best he could. Harvey Milk, on the other hand, had other ideas, and it was basically Milk's position. He was of the opinion that if the nation as a whole could see that gay people can be heroes too, and that they're not all just these, sinful sodomists who are, trying to steal your children and convert everyone. He was like, if the world can see that gay people can be heroes, then the national, global, whatever opinion towards gay people will start to change, and we can start to actually get some things done. And so he took it upon himself to contact the San Francisco Chronicle to try to organize a story about Sipple and his sexuality. So this did out Sipple on a national scale, and also kind of destroyed Sipple's relationship with his mother, who was a very devout conservative Baptist woman in Detroit. It was also after this article was published that Sipple got just a simple thank you note from the president, but Harvey Milk was of the opinion that if Sipple was a straight man, then he would have been invited to the White House for a full dinner and that kind of thing. And Milk was vocal about this as well. But I couldn't find much more on their relationship and the events that followed after that. But yeah,
I'll
Milk
find it for you.
outed a guy on a national scale. Not cool. All right, so moving forward to 1976, during the previous year's election, George Moscone, the mayor of San Francisco, had made a promise to Milk that if he didn't win the city supervisor position, that Moscone would appoint him to the Board of Permit Appeals so that he had some kind of governmental position. And so that's what he did. He kept his promise and appointed Milk to the Board of Permit Appeals. And this made Milk the first openly gay city commissioner in the whole country. And, Milk appreciated this, but he had bigger dreams. He wanted to hold a position in the California State Assembly. He also had enough support to win and, fully could have done it. But Moscone had made a deal with the current assembly speaker that someone else should run for the position, and that someone else was named Art Agnos, whose name I recognize, but I don't know a lot about him. Again, that was an ancillary rabbit hole I didn't want to go down.
I'll go down it.
So because of this deal that Moscone had made with the current assembly speaker, and because of a mayoral dictate that said that, no, what is it? Neither appointed nor elected officials are allowed to run a campaign while performing their duties. So because of this, that would have prevented Milk from running. However, Milk was not one to just kind of sit and take the bullshit that he was dealt. So he decided he was going to run anyway. And when Moscone found out about that, he was forced to fire Milk. And this was after only 5 weeks that Milk had been on the Board of Permit Appeals. But all of this together gave Milk a very strong political underdog identity, constantly being shut out and, facing not opposition, but obstacles, I guess. And this underdog identity played a very large part in his more liberal and anti-establishment rhetoric. And he would often rant about how those higher up in the government were, all organized against him. And so then Milk began an extremely disorganized campaign. He would run the campaign operations out of his camera store. He would take funds from the register without any kind of thought or consideration for accounting. He would have volunteer lists on just scrap paper. And there was even an 11-year-old neighborhood girl who was the campaign manager's assistant. He was just doing whatever he could. It did not say in this article if he had aggressive ADHD. I'm going to go ahead and say I think he probably had aggressive ADHD. This was a very manic man. He was fanatical. He was kind of eccentric. And because of just all this chaos that was around him, this kind of soured the relationship that he had with Scott Smith. That being said, because of his eccentricity and his charisma, like we said earlier, he was really, really good at getting media attention.
Would you say it's his charisma, uniqueness,
nerve and talent? I would not, because I'm not affiliated with WoW Presents RuPaul or RuPaul's Drag Race. Here's a little fun fact. Milk was a very passionate man, but he was very politically dubious. In February of 1978, he wrote a letter to then President Jimmy Carter in defense of a man named Jim Jones, who was the leader.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, he was the leader of a cult known as the People's Temple. And it was in this letter, I think he said that Jim Jones was a man of the highest quality or something like that. Just kind of in high defense of Jim Jones. It was strategic, though. It was strategic, though.
Okay. Please
so
explain.
for those of you who are unfamiliar with the People's Temple, they were just kind of like a new age religious movement that was more of a cult, and it ended pretty violently with a mass murder-suicide of over 900 people in November of 1978 in the cult's jungle commune in Guyana.
This is where the
South
phrase
America.
"drink the Kool-Aid" comes from, even though it wasn't Kool-Aid.
Oh, really?
It was Flavor Aid.
I didn't know that. Yeah, but the People's Temple had started in San Francisco, so there were a lot of people in San Francisco politics who had somewhat of a vested interest in the cult, more or less to just make sure they weren't doing any damage. So Milk had written that letter in 1978 to the president defending Jim Jones, calling him a very upstanding man. But 2 years earlier, in 1976, Milk found out that Jones was supporting both him and Art Agnos in their political endeavors. And when he found that out, he made a comment to one of his friends. He was like, well, fuck him. I'll take his workers, but that's the game that Jim Jones plays. But then he turned around and told his supporters, make sure you're always nice to the People's Temple. And if they ask you to do something, do it. And then send them a thank you note, thanking them for asking you to do it in the first place. As I said before, this man was a Gemini. He was playing it all. So I don't think he actually supported Jim Jones. I think he was more or less just like, let's not, let's stay on their good side. Let's not give them any reason to come after us because they're fucking crazy. Um, I don't
They
know.
were fucking brainwashed. Jim Jones was fucking crazy.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah. Unfortunately, Milk once again lost the election, and in an effort to organize outside of the establishment politics, he co-founded the San Francisco Gay Democratic Club. Um, Again, another rabbit hole that I did not go down, but that's what
Add it to
happened.
the list. We'll report back.
So a little bit of background on the political climate of the time. Um, in the late 1970s, Christian fundamentalism was on the rise, in an antagonistic response to the earlier waves of the gay rights movement and the free love hippie movement and all that. And this led to the repeal of a lot of anti-discrimination laws on the basis of sexual orientation in several states. One of the biggest was in Miami in Dade County. And who was I didn't write this down, but I should have. There was this like famous singer woman who was very fundamentalist Christian, Anita Bryant. She was kind of at the forefront of this in Miami. And so once Miami had repealed these anti-discrimination laws, it kind of started a wave across the country of these other state and local governments being like, actually, you know what? It is cool to discriminate against gay people because they're sinful. We were making progress, and then the Christians set us back. Surprise, surprise. So people started to get more.
We are not going to put all religious groups into one category, Max, because the Catholic Church was, and a lot of church groups were very fundamental in saving a lot of lives during the AIDS crisis.
Yes, this is valid. I just have baggage. So it was around this time that people started to get very vocal and very loud about how much they disapproved of homosexuality, and they started really, really conflating it with pedophilia and just like sin in general. And I think also, I don't have like stats for this, but I think they also kind of linked it to different cults because there were a lot of cults that were on the rise in the 60s and 70s, and late 50s, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So gay bashing or gay specific hate crimes also increased in the country, including San Francisco and even in the Castro. And it got to a point that was so bad that the gay community of San Francisco decided that the police just weren't doing enough to keep gay people safe. So they organized their own like vigilante street patrol to walk around the streets at night to try to protect their community. Gays are always going to look out for each other. We see this time and time again, and the government's not going to do it. Naturally, this political climate was very divisive, and when the San Francisco supervisor elections were finally reorganized to operate with a district ballot instead of a citywide ballot, Milk was very quickly identified as the frontrunner in 1976. Milk's biggest competition was Rick Stokes, who was a very soft-spoken lawyer. He was also gay, but he was not near as loud about it as Milk was. And he was the guy that took Milk's place on the Board of Permit Appeals after Milk was fired. He had been, Stokes, that is, he had been openly gay for longer, but Milk was much louder. And Stokes had a lot of support because he labeled himself as like a businessman who just happens to be gay, instead of like making it about the whole personality. But Milk had a very manic drive and was very dedicated to the community and even got endorsed by the San Francisco Chronicle. And so he did win the election by 30% out of 17 total candidates, over half of whom were gay, which we love to see, gay people in politics. Milk did, however, know about the dangers that he faced being very openly gay in politics, and he knew that it was possible that he could get assassinated at some point. So he started to like keep a vocal diary on tape of like his wishes and his thoughts and opinions and who he thought should kind of like succeed him, that kind of thing. When Milk was first sworn in, it was national news for obvious reasons, because he was the first openly gay non-incumbent to win an elected position in the U.S. And he compared himself to Jackie Robinson, which I don't think would go over super well today, but he was proud of himself. He broke some barriers. There were some other firsts for the city who got elected alongside him. Like there was a single mother named Carol Ruth Silver, a Chinese American named Gordon Lau, and a black woman named Ella Hill Hutch. Um, Once he was in office, he again was, very manic and kind of drove his more established coworkers and colleagues crazy, even playing pranks and doing jokes and just being generally unpredictable. However, the one constant in his term was his disdain for large corporations and real estate developers. Um, he kind of got entangled with another supervisor, one of his colleagues named Dan White. At first, Milk and White were on the same page that a mental health facility for troubled adolescents should not be placed in White's district, which is 2 miles south of the Castro district. They didn't think that it should go there. But later, Milk learned a little bit more about it and decided that it actually was a good idea. So he switched his vote, and he actually had the deciding vote. So him switching ensured that White did not get what he wanted. And White did not ever forget this or forgive Milk for it. And in fact, White went on to oppose literally every single bill and piece of legislature that Milk endorsed. The most popular bill that Milk supported was one that outlawed discrimination based on sexual orientation, and it was called the most stringent and encompassing in the nation. And once it got passed, it demonstrated the growing political power of homosexuals. There was only one dissenting vote on the bill, and that was Dan White. However, that did not stop Mayor Moscone from signing it into law. Now, on November 10th of 1978, this is 10 months after they were both sworn in, Dan White resigned from his supervisory position, citing that his annual salary of $9,600 a year was not enough. Can you imagine? Ugh. A few days later, White changed his mind and asked if he could be reappointed. Mayor Moscone initially agreed, but then after kind of being pressured by other supervisors and paying attention to the growing ethnic diversity of White's district, he decided not to reappoint White, which White did not appreciate. A week after this, news broke of the mass murder-suicide of the 900 members of the People's Temple, and there was a California state representative named Leo Ryan who had gone to check on the commune, and he was also killed. And White was kind of petty about it. He was upset that he was no longer news or newsworthy. So on November 27th, 1978, when Moscone planned to announce White's replacement on the Board of Supervisors, White snuck into City Hall through the basement window, avoiding the metal detectors that had just been placed because after the whole People's Temple thing, they really upped their security measures, and White wasn't happy about this, so he had to sneak into a basement window to get into City Hall. And then he found Moscone and shot him dead in his office. And then he started to make his way back to his old office, and he ran into Harvey Milk in the hallway and also shot and murdered him. Following this, it was a very dark time in San Francisco, both because of the whole mass murder-suicide of the People's Temple, which had originated in San Francisco, and because of these two political assassinations. And people were pretty astounded at White and his actions because he had actually been slated to receive an award in the upcoming future because he saved a woman and a child from a 17-story building when he was a firefighter back in 1977. And he was also said to actually have a lot in common with Milk, more than anyone else on the Board of Supervisors, because he had been a more vocal supporter and advocate of the gay community in his political career. And they got along just fine until Milk switched his vote, and then White got really petty about it. In the aftermath of the assassinations, police, unsurprisingly, supported the murderer. Most of the SFPD were working-class Irish descendants who disliked the gay and liberal direction the city was moving in, and several of them were former colleagues of White's from when he was in the fire department, and could be heard making jokes about Harvey Milk and his death and wearing t-shirts that said "Free Dan White" in the literal days following the assassinations. And then White also showed absolutely no remorse for his actions. White's jury for the trial was mostly middle class, white, and Catholic. Gays and ethnic minorities had been excluded from the selection pool. Wonder why. Keeping with this theme, the trial was a farce. White's defense attorney, Doug Schmidt, used the diminished capacity defense and tried to argue that White's mental state was caused A, by a manipulation in City Hall, and then B, was exacerbated by, wait for it, a junk food binge the night before the murders. And this would later be called the Twinkie defense. White was acquitted of the first-degree murder charge, but he was found guilty of the voluntary manslaughter charge and was sentenced to 7 years and 8 months, but would only serve 5 years and some change due to good behavior. Unsurprisingly, the gay community of San Francisco stormed City Hall when they heard the verdict and began to riot. And a reporter actually asked one of the rioters why they were rioting, and the rioter said, "Just tell people that we ate too many Twinkies. That's why this is happening." This and the ensuing riots became known as the White Night Riots. Later that evening, police officers who during the City Hall riots had been told to stand their ground and not engage, but later that evening, they dressed in full-on riot gear and stormed the Elephant Walk bar on Castro Street, which I believe is a gay bar, and they began just beating patrons at random, just like physically, aggressively assaulting these completely random patrons. They did this for about 15 minutes, and then they left and started just attacking random people on the street to protect and serve. In the aftermath of the trial, San Francisco ended the district supervisor ballot election structure in 1980 because they were afraid that it was just too divisive. But then that process came back in the mid-90s. Let's see. California voters also voted to change diminished capacity from a defense to a charge in an effort to reduce the likelihood of acquittals, basically just because of this same situation. White was released on January 7th, 1984, after serving about 5 years of his sentence. But on October 21st, 1985, he was found dead in a running car in his ex-wife's garage. He had committed suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning because he had been just fully depressed by losing his family and the whole situation that he had created. I don't have a ton of sympathy there, but, you know. Milk left a legacy behind, but it took a little bit for the positivity and optimism to return to San Francisco and the Castro because he had such a big and unique, eccentric presence that no one could really fill it after that. And so people were just kind of depressed. But obviously they, got over it because the Castro is one of the top gayborhoods in the country, and San Francisco is, I think, the gayest city in the country. He's received several different honors. He's had streets and parks and benches and things like that named after him. But some of the biggest accolades and honors that he received was a posthumous Presidential Medal of Freedom awarded to his nephew on his behalf in 2009 by President Barack Obama. And then in 2008, which I think inspired President Obama to give him this award, the movie Milk came out in 2008, starring Sean Penn and Josh Brolin as Dan White. And the film won 2 Academy Awards, one for Best Actor and one for Best Original Screenplay. If you are one of the 3 people in the world that has Peacock Premium, you can watch it on Peacock Premium. Also, fun fact about the film, apparently it took 15 years to make, but only 8 weeks to film. So I guess the other 14 years and 44 whatever weeks was, I guess, just research and interviews and stuff. I don't know. I'm glad that they sank all that time into it. Milk has appeared on several lists of gay heroes, American heroes, etc., and is most remembered for his charisma and media prowess, both of which were instrumental in making the quote-unquote regular gay people of the time feel less invisible.
And there you have it.
Yeah. Do you have thoughts about Mr. Harvey Milk?
Yeah, no, I definitely have a couple of rabbit holes to go down, but I thank you for doing all that research. It was very thorough.
Yeah, the vibe that I got from him was I don't know. I kept thinking about Pete Buttigieg, maybe just because they're both like openly gay politicians that have big ears, but um I don't know. I respect the work that he did for the gay community, and we need these like loud and proud figures, but he at the end of the day, he was a politician. There were things that he did that weren't great. He also did have a taste for younger men. Um so I'm not going to, call him perfect or whatever. But also, I mean, he became a martyr, and that always kind of changes the tone of how people are remembered, regardless of what they did in their life. But
True.
yeah, we learn something new every day.
We did. Well, Max, happy Pride.
Happy Pride, everyone. I hope you have been enjoying our queer content, our little Pride history lessons. Yeah, we thank you so
Thanks
much for listening.
listening.
For those of you that have. If you want to keep up with us, you can follow us on Instagram at Mutable Immutables. You can find us on Twitter at Immutables Pod. You can also find us on YouTube at Mutable Immutables. And you can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts,
YouTube,
wherever
I think.
else.
Yeah.
Nordstrom Rack. I don't know. Yeah.
Under the Jersey Turnpike.
Yeah, we're wherever you don't want us to be.
Oh my God. We're in your
Okay.
walls.
The scratching you hear, it's me. Hi.
In the yellow wallpaper. All right. That's a wrap.
Okay. That's a wrap.
Bye.
Goodbye, everybody. Happy Pride. Be safe.